What is up, everybody? Welcome to the Tomatolito Boxing Show. I'm Heck Kelly, and it is a pleasure to be sitting here in front of the microphone talking to you once again about the sport that we all love and adore so much, and that is boxing. One of the fights that I wanted to talk to you about today was the Shakur Stevenson fight that took place, with so many fights and big names and taking place here as we dwindle down 2023. As we start wrapping up 2023 as far as the sport is concerned. Still many fights left, still many fights to cover. But Shakur Stevenson recently fought, and he fought on a Thursday evening where out in Las Vegas, and he was actually part of a big card that was set up to kick off a huge weekend for Las Vegas, which was the inaugural F1 Grand Prix that they have set up out in Las Vegas, the Grand Prix race, which takes place through portions of the actual strip in Las Vegas. And so this was actually going to be the opener. Top Rank put on a huge event. And of course, none other than Shakur Stevenson was going to be headlining this against power puncher, Dominican power puncher and heavy hitter Edwin De Los Santos, who has also been on the up and up, and is just a couple fights away from breaking out as the next big star. This was supposed to be his coming out party. It had all the writings on the wall that Edwin De Los Santos could pull the upset against Shakur Stevenson. Again, I want to revisit this fight because all these fights that we have been talking about have had huge effects and have caused movement within their respective divisions. This fight ended up being for the WBC vacant title at 135. Vacant because Devin Haney has moved up to challenge, and we're going to cover that fight as well, has moved up to challenge Regis Prograis at 140 pounds for his WBC title in that division. So the title became vacant, and Shakur Stevenson, Edwin De Los Santos were going to fight for it. And they did. And it was a dull fight. It was a disappointing fight. What we anticipated and the lead up to the fight did not deliver. And we saw this from Shakur Stevenson prior. One fight that comes to mind was against Jeremiah Nakathila, where it was a heavy puncher, and Shakur Stevenson, to his own admission, said, "Why would I walk into the heavy punching power and get knocked out? I ended up outsmarting him and outboxed him and cruised to a decision." Another fight in which there were several boos from the crowd. It's probably one of the first fights that he's experienced in that we have witnessed Shakur be involved in, where the crowd was expressing their disappointment and their disdain for the way that the fight was playing out. Nonetheless, Shakur Stevenson would be successful and would move on and continue undefeated. This was a similar case that we witnessed here, and there has been a lot of narrative and a lot of talk as to what the actual reason would be for the fight having played out that way. A lot of pointing fingers at the end of the fight. Edwin De Los Santos ended up nicknaming Shakur Stevenson Shakira Twitterson. In other words, expressing that all Shakur did was run. All Shakur did was get on his bicycle, not want to engage, didn't want to make a fight, and yet acknowledging that he's a big talker on Twitter, on social media, but when it came time to fight, he stayed away from him. Shakur hit back saying, "Hey, it's not like he stood in front of me either. He was also running. I wasn't being the scary one. I wasn't being the one that was hesitant, but both of us were. He stayed away from me too." They both landed a few punches on each other to where they could have displayed their power and let the other know that, "Hey, I got this waiting for you." But other than that, it was a big dance fest. It was a bit of a dull fight, and it sucks because it was for a major title at 135. Shakur Stevenson comes away with the victory. Shakur Stevenson remains undefeated and is 21-0 with the WBC title in this new division now, his third division with a title. Remember, he was a champ at 126, then 130, now a champ at 135, takes over the Devin Haney title. The talks that him and Devin Haney were going to fight, the back and forth, that never materialized. And then the reason we lead up to this fight with Edwin De Los Santos, if you recall, Shakur Stevenson was supposed to fight Frank Martin. Frank Martin, who fights under the tutelage of Derek James out of the Charlo and Errol Spence camp. Ryan Garcia is in that camp now. That fight apparently was pretty much a done deal, and then Frank Martin pulled out. And people lost their mind on social media and just basically accused him of ducking Shakur Stevenson, of being scared of this, and we haven't really heard much. Other than Frank Martin saying that he wasn't happy with the money, and therefore he didn't agree to the terms and pulled out of the negotiations. And we go back to what we were talking about with Ryan Garcia and his back and forth with his promoters, with Golden Boy and with De La Hoya and Bernard Hopkins, where he doesn't have a title, but he does have a huge social media following. So he's able to put butts in seats and get people to arrive to his fights. He has a following because of his social media presence, but he doesn't have a title. So when it comes to negotiations, well, he has somewhat of leverage. And depending on who he's fighting, if they're lesser known names, some similar to what we just witnessed with Oscar Duarte, well, he's going to be the A side because he's the one bringing the fan base, and he's going to be the bigger reason for the attendance for that fight. But if he's trying to negotiate against a champion, say against a Haney or a Teofimo, if he gets to that point, or even with Gervonta, well, he's going to be the B side because they also have followings and they got titles. So leverage is on their side. What did Frank Martin have? Frank Martin, his biggest victory to date is his one-sided victory and one-sided performance in which he managed to disrupt and impose his style on up-and-coming Michel Rivera, which was a very, very intriguing fight when this fight happened, because these are two names that are ready to break through and ready to become household names. And that was a big fight, a big crossroads fight for both of them. Frank Martin ended up making it easy work, completely disrupted, and had an answer for everything that Michel Rivera could bring that night, and came out victorious. And that's why he was able to get into that fight with Shakur Stevenson and then pulls out. Enter Edwin De Los Santos. So we lead into this Thursday night fight, a fight that had a co-main event with Vaquero Navarrete, who's the champ at 130, who took over for the title that Shakur vacated, the WBO title at 130. Remember, that was Jamel Herring's title. Shakur takes it from him. Then he took the title from Oscar Valdez, the WBC, and then he moves up to 135 and vacates. Navarrete took over the WBO title and defended it against Oscar Valdez earlier this year in what was a hell of a fight. And again, Navarrete found himself in a hell of a showdown, a fight in which it was a you pick 'em type fight against a former Valdez and Stevenson opponent in Robson Conceicao, Brazilian Robson Conceicao, who in my opinion did not get the nod against Oscar Valdez, but I feel that he did enough to have beat Oscar Valdez on that night. And then of course he ended up getting picked apart by Shakur Stevenson. So we go from performances like that by Shakur, and then this is a performance that he was supposed to basically shut Edwin De Los Santos out, because Edwin De Los Santos is on a trajectory where he's got the power, he's got this, he's got that, he's building a name for himself, and he's a big puncher in this division. This was a statement type fight for Shakur Stevenson, and by the same token, it could have been for De Los Santos, and neither fighter delivered. Needless to say, Navarrete and Conceicao stole the night. Navarrete retained his title. They could have been their own headliner, but because it was such a big opening weekend in Las Vegas for the leading up to the F1 inaugural weekend in Vegas, this was the right card to make, with decent names, attracting a Mexican base, with a great Brazilian opponent, and the fight delivered in the co-main event. And then the next star, who's becoming a household name, against a heavy puncher who people may not know, but was 12 rounds away or so, just one fight away from making a statement against the next big star in the sport, which is Shakur. And Edwin could have made that statement and catapulted his career into new levels and new heights, and didn't deliver. It was a dull fight with little punches thrown. 116-112 by Tim Cheatham, 115-113 by David Sutherland, 116-112 by Steve Weisfeld. And Shakur was awarded the WBC lightweight title. I want to talk about one more thing that happened in this fight and why it was such a dull fight. If we look at the numbers, and it looks like they made punch that history. There was an article that came out by CompuBox, released this, and in CompuBox history, Edwin De Los Santos made CompuBox history with 40 landed punches, which happens to be the fewest punches landed in the 12th round fight in CompuBox's 38-year history. Edwin De Los Santos made boxing history by being the fighter who landed the least amount of punches, landing 40 in the 38-year history of CompuBox. To put it in perspective, the co-main event that we just talked about, Vaquero Navarrete landed 23 power punches in the 11th round alone. Edwin lands 40. The total numbers, Stevenson landed 65 of 209 thrown. And that's total punches, 65 of 209. De Los Santos, 40 of his 316 that he threw. Of those punches, 155 of them were jabs. 46 of those 65 that Stevenson landed were jabs. The remainder, the 19, were power punches. Edwin De Los Santos, who threw 40 total punches out of his 316, 26 of them were jabs, 14 power punches. Is that not insane? Is that not crazy? And it sucks because, yes, people were booing. And at the end of the fight, during the Shakur Stevenson interview, Shakur Stevenson doesn't even acknowledge the fans. He basically discards the fact that the fans were booing and just says, hey, it happens. It's happened to the greats. And by the greats, he was referring to Floyd Mayweather Jr., Andre Ward, and Terrence Crawford, who were all in the back with them, providing words of wisdom and encouragement and pre-fight, warm-up, leading up to the fight, pre-fight, what have you. Just being there with them, just the presence that they were there with them and accompanying him on such a big night that he was headlining. The fact that those three names were in presence, they didn't just swing by to say hi. They were hanging out with them in the back room. They walked out with them. They posed for numerous pictures that made it all across social media and websites. And Shakur Stevenson apologizes to his idols, being those three big names that I just mentioned, in Floyd, Terrence, and Andre. He apologizes for his poor performance, apologizing to them, discarding what the fans had to say as far as their boos and their expression of how dull of a fight it was. And when you start taking that route, you start basically shunning on your fans and shutting your fans down, not caring what they have to say when they're the ones that are putting you up on a pedestal and going out of their way to purchase tickets, going out of their way to break their schedules, whether it be work life or family life or school life, what have you, because they bank on you. This is the star that they're putting their coin behind and going out of their way to travel and make it to his fight, expecting something special, expecting having witnessed something special that night, and end up witnessing a dull fight, such as the one that we had. There was some Dominican fan base there in Las Vegas, but the majority were there to see Shakur. The entire arena was on their feet, applauding, cheering, oohing and ahhing for the co-main event between Navarrete and Conceicao, which was a perfect lead-up. They set the stage and the atmosphere for what was supposed to be an even better main event. And the main event was a sleeper. And then he doesn't acknowledge it. Doesn't really care what the fans have to say. Doesn't really care what the fans express. Don't forget who's putting you up there. Because yes, you have God-given abilities. You have all the talent in the world. You're gifted. You're a gifted athlete, a gifted boxer. You have an amazing understanding of the game. The way you adapt and the knowledge that you've accrued at such a young age. Sets you apart as one of the few that we have across the entire boxing landscape in today's age that can take the sport of boxing to new heights and new levels as the old guard begins to retire and fade out. The old guard meaning the Terence Crawfords and the Canelos, the Joshuas and the Furies. We have Inoue, who's doing amazing things. Lomas are going to start disappearing. We just witnessed Linares retire as he lost to Jack Catterall. The old guard is starting to step out, and this is the new guard. And the ability that these young men are starting to display, their abilities, their talent, the way that they approach the sport, it's not only refreshing, but it's exciting. And it's easy to get behind because it's taking the sport and has all the potential to take the sport to new heights and new levels. But don't forget that the fans are the ones that argue on your behalf whenever the sport comes up with their friends and relatives. Argue on your behalf through social media, because this is the age, the social media age that we're in right now. Go out of their way, especially during these rough economic financial times that not just the US is experiencing, but the entire world. The entire world. Not just people that live in Vegas went to go see you. People traveled from out of state. And the lodging. And the rental cars and the hotels and the food and the travel and the planes, the plane tickets and all. All you owe to the fans is acknowledgement and gratitude. And they will continue to show out for you. So apologizing to your idols for putting on a poor performance, great. 2 of those guys have done it. And they're out of the sport. Andre Ward, one of the most grateful fighters and a true example for the sport of boxing, who is now a great, great commentator. Floyd Mayweather had a love-hate relationship with the fans, purposefully done, purposefully executed. Ripped the page from the WWE, WWF days and executed it perfectly, realizing that it didn't matter if the fans were cheering or hating on you. He wanted to be the villain, and people were attracted to that. And he did it perfectly. Terence Crawford, fighting anybody and everybody who's available throughout his career, feeling that he was wronged while his time at Top Rank, because he just happened to be there when Lomachenko was there and he felt Loma was getting a bigger push than he was. This, that, what have you. But he continues to shine. And he's going to go down in the history books as the only man to date to have become undisputed in this 4-belt era in 2 different weight divisions, at 140 and more recently at 147, and is daring to continue and try to shoot for a 3rd division. Hence why he's been calling out Canelo. And knows and is quick to acknowledge the fan base that follows him. He's quick to rip into anybody that's a hater, and he's very aware of those that speak against him. Come press conferences, he's quick to call them out. That's how aware he is. So for Shakur to have said that, and then the acknowledgement of, hey, I'm not going to make any excuses, but now the narrative has been that there was a shoulder injury, that there was a hand injury. Bernardo Osuna brought it up during the post-fight in-ring interview, and there was the opening of that door. At least a foot was there in the door where there could have been an injury leading up to it. Now Bob Arum has come out in recent articles and said that, yeah, we were afraid that he was going to pull out, and so nobody wanted to. I mean, if you're going into it with an injury, Edwin De Los Santos had a case that, hey, he could make a case of it. Hey, you guys kind of pulled a fast one on me because this is a fighter that went into the fight not fully 100%. Where he potentially, if he came in with any injuries or so, he potentially could have bought himself more time as well, but because it was such a big name and he was a B-side, he continued to pursue it and go into it. It was almost like it was in bad faith and not disclosed during negotiations and during the lead-up. So I don't know if there's any recourse there, but it could definitely be a case made for De Los Santos. Nonetheless, the fight happened. Shakur pulled through. He's the new WBC champ at 135. And he sits atop that division. Gervonta has been holding on to this WBA regular world title, which is kind of like the similar version of what David Morrell has to Canelo's title at 168. Well, Gervonta has that WBA version to Devin Haney being the full undisputed champ. He's been hanging on to that belt for a long time. And then, who else do you have? Devin Haney. He hasn't fully vacated and hasn't been fully stripped of 135. We don't know if he's going back to it or not to defend those titles, but now you got a big name and a reason to make a case for a big fight at 135 because it didn't happen before. But you could come back and fight Shakur, and that would be a big, big fight. So that was the events of November 16th that took place. For Edwin De Los Santos, he's going to move on. And he's maybe, I would say, 3 solid fights with top 10, top 5, top 10 names will get him back into another title fight. But he can't have any more nights like this. He's a good fighter with good boxing, quick reflexes, and heavy hands. I would say he's 2 to 3 fights away from getting back into another title fight. For Shakur, if he stays at 135, which I hope he does, maybe he'll get his big fight with Loma. It looks like Lomachenko and Kambosos have been in negotiations for early 24. If that materializes, well, Shakur could definitely take on, say, a William Cepeda. But there's a lot of good fights. Maybe now we'll get the Frank Martin fight. Does Frank Martin deserve a title shot? Who knows? But he's good. Whatever happened there, but if he pulled out due to money, arguing the money side, if he re-enters negotiations with Shakur, he's going to get even less money because Shakur has a title now around him. So in that sense, he kind of messed up. But 135 is awesome. And the talent there is amazing. So I'm excited to see what Shakur's going to bring to the table, how Shakur's career continues to develop. I hope, and I don't want to hold him to I don't want to hold the comments that I made about the way that he discarded the fans and the fact that people were booing and people were not happy with the performance that he put out on the ring, and for him to just discard it and do away with it. The reason I don't want to zero in so much, even though we did spend quite a bit of time on this episode on that, it's huge. That's a huge factor to where his level of notoriety heads to during his career, where his legacy ends up being, because the fans are the ones that follow you. The fans are the ones purchasing the tickets. The more fan base, the bigger your fan base, the bigger the gates, the bigger the pay-per-view numbers, the bigger the following, the bigger your legacy. And the bigger your following, you bet your ass that they're going to get you into bigger and more high-profile fights. Mega fights. The quote-unquote mega fights. Which is what we're trying to see with what we just had with Charlo and Canelo. 2 divisions up. And Crawford trying to do that. Move up 3 divisions to go challenge Canelo. And those are the mega fights. Shakur is that good. But I don't want to just hold this on him, because I mentioned it on the Ryan Garcia episode. And yes, this is a fight that I wanted to go back and recap. But obviously we've already, if you go back and revisit the episodes that we've covered, I mentioned that on the Ryan Garcia episode with Duarte, where they express and come across as mature, but their actions often display immaturity. And the only thing you could put your finger on is that they're still young men. And they're still coming into their own. And they're going to get better. And if they don't, well, then their career starts taking a different route. But Shakur's that smart that he'll zero in on it. And especially having legends like that hang out with them, they'll get him on the right track. I have no doubts. He's young. He's coming into his own. And he has all the abilities in the world. All the athleticism and ability and talent. God-given gifts to take the sport and be one of the few to take the sport into new heights and new levels. That's how good I think Shakur Stevenson is. So I leave you guys with that. Let me know what you guys think. I want to start seeing you guys give me more comments. Email me. Let me know what you want me to cover. Reach out to me on Instagram. That's always been my main go-to, Instagram. And when I post up an episode, I put it on there. Link's always in the bio. Click the bio. It'll link you over to the podcast platform. And you can catch all the episodes in the entire catalog. We're getting close to the 200 episodes. You could check out the entire catalog there. And the more you revisit these episodes to see if I'm switching back and forth, and if I come one episode and tell you this about Shakur, and then you go back to the last time I covered a Shakur fight and you're like, wait a minute, you're on the bandwagon over here, and now you're off the rocker over here. Like, what are you doing? Like, call me out on it. I think I'm fairly consistent. I like to say that I'm fairly consistent. I do my best to analyze and do these reviews, recaps, previews in the most unbiased way. But every so often, we could drop the ball. All of us could drop the ball. And I want you guys to call me out on that, because it only makes for an even better conversation, and it'll create new dialogue. And if you don't like what I'm saying on any of these episodes, reach out to me. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about it. Be specific as to what it is that you didn't like and what you want me to recap on. Let's do it. Let's talk about it. I'll bring it up. I'll mention you by name, and I'll acknowledge it. And we'll cover those points. I love it. I love hearing from you guys. Thank you guys for all the support, for all the love, and let's keep pushing forward. Have yourselves a great night. I'm Hekali. This is a Toma Todito Boxing Show. Have a good night.